Committee. We have a big agenda, so we're just going to dive in and get started.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, the minutes are approved. Community Development Manager update. So we start with the committee. Have any questions for the staff on the report? I have a quick one about opportunity zones, and it's not really a clear formulated question, but I was at a conference last week and went to several. It was a Congress for the New Urbanism, and there were lots of sessions about opportunity zones. These are, like, depending on who you are, these can save the world or they can destroy it. So depending on how they are managed and invested. And so I know of 2 projects here in town that are using opportunity zone, or may use opportunity zone funds. Do you know of others, Paul, or anybody else?
Hi, Paul D'Angelo, Community Economic Development. I do know probably of the same 2. I don't know how public that is necessarily, but I do know 2 that are discussing using opportunity funds and then trying to use those funds as a match with some level of affordability. But that's the tricky part with these funds, that the zones and the funds where people are looking for a high rate of return from the funds, and when you add affordable, that can lower the rate of return. And so you're looking for the type of investor that really wants to make an impact in the community.
That's right, that's right. And I know that we passed a resolution back in October about these, and frankly, I don't know that any of us, I will just speak for myself, I did not fully understand the implications of opportunity zones really until this past week. So I'm going to go back and look at that resolution, and but what is clear to me from the conversations that I had last week is that if we want to maximize those investments for the benefit of this community, that is something we are going to have to do, rather than, because there's nothing in the opportunity zone legislation itself that mandates that.
Correct.
That actually got taken out of the legislation at some point. So again, I don't know what we said in that resolution. I don't remember, so I'll take a look at that.
We can always bring it back next month. It kind of followed the policy link guidelines that cities should adopt to kind of look for the equitable investments and
Well, that's good, at least.
no displacement, et cetera.
Yeah, okay, great. And Paul, do you want to just sit up here well, let me do this. Kathy, do you have is there anything you'd like to share in terms of staffing in the Community Development Office?
Yes, so I would love to announce that Paul has been named as our new Community Development
Program director.
Program Director. So
From our
we are
housing.
glad to have him on board, and I would love to have him join me to help answer questions.
Great.
If he would be willing to do that.
I will do it.
And that way you don't have to pop up and down all the time. Great. And congratulations. We're very happy that you're on board. You've provided great, solid leadership and lots of great work for the last, how many ever years you've been here? 2, 3?
Year and a half.
Just a year and a half? Oh my gosh.
Very nice. Thank you.
You've done so much. Okay, any questions from you guys on the report? All right. And anything else that you want to add that on the staff report, the community development report?
Not at this time. We're trying to keep it consistent and really kind of showcase what we're doing in community development.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, moving on to the SPF process discussion. So we have a memo about this, and hopefully this isn't news to anyone, or the fact that we're having this discussion. We teed this up right after we made the SPF grants last time. And so we do have now staff's recommendation on this. Who's going to present this? You are, okay. And you can, well, I don't know, for purposes of video, I don't know if we need to have you. Dan, does it matter if Paul sits there, or would you prefer that he be? As long as he's on mic, okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Great, thanks. So everyone should have the SPF memo in front of them. I think what I wanted to focus on were a little bit of the history and the recommendations. So back in October, there was a larger group meeting with several members of the community agencies, as well as working with the staff at Equity and Inclusion. So the conversation revolved around how to make this funding initiative that we've been doing better and how it could be a better focus in the community. So that memo is probably your second attachment that came out in December, and then it was discussed to bring it back in the future with a little bit more staff analysis on how to continue with SPF. So taking a look at the feedback we got in October, as well as, again, looking at this on a staff level, we did have some recommendations. And if you want to go to the second page with the action request, we were looking at developing standards for assessing SPF applications and evaluating organizational outcomes, prioritizing applications that use best or promising community-based practices to eliminate the opportunity gap, and that seemed to be the focus out of those meetings. Prioritize applications by organizations working in partnership with the Asheville City Schools, support programs that address localized barriers such as transportation, add need-based capacity building strategies and accountability with partnerships. Important to city staff as well here was to separate the SPF application process from CDBG with a recommended timeline below, and possibly create a tiered grant system that is capped at some level, perhaps $15,000 with grants at $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000. Establishing a minimum award amount as well could be effective for working with the agencies as well as staff capacity. And it also a possibility of making the funding every 2 years instead of one, so there's a larger pot of funding that could be available into the community. So those are a lot of the recommendations that came out as we up the standards with SPF. That would come with monitoring and compliance. I don't think it'll be as heavy as CDBG or home, but with those additional standards would come additional compliance and monitoring, so there's the staff capacity issue. We love the partnerships, working with all the agencies, but this year was great, but there were 27 awards, and so we'll be putting those contracts out, and whether the award's $1 million or $500, it all takes about the same amount of money. But excited to have this funding feature with our agencies, but we're trying to see if there's a better way to do it based on your guidance as well as working with the community. And thanks to Kimberly and her team, especially back in October, working with everybody to try to come up with some recommendations.
Great. All right. We'll start here. Do people have questions for Paul about this, or just open it up generally for discussion? And we will, this is, so are you looking, we can take a vote on this if we want to today, because that's where it is in the agenda. So we will be taking public comment on this as well, because, as a threshold matter, there are a number of groups that get funding right now that would not get funding under this proposal. So that's a big deal that we need to talk about.
And if I can say, Julie, that the applications that we just did will happen for the 1920 year. Anything new that happens won't start till 2021. So if there wanted to be additional discussion, that would be,
Right.
next month, or we could bring back maybe more of a focus.
That's
we can
right.
do that as well.
Right, we don't have to take a vote on it.
Correct.
Because we won't be doing, the application process will not be until early next year. Right, but we can. So with that, questions, comments?
There are a few that I have questions about, but the overall process, the overall recommendation, I believe that it gives us more confidence in granting funds, but I think it brings a lot of grievance to our applicants and to our communities, especially a few areas. There was an area where create a tiered grant system, and we have grants broken down, of course, into different tiers, and we have grants as small as $5,000, as large as $15,000, and I just wanted to get an idea of the average amount that's asked for, because I don't think we ever get as low as $5,000, so I don't think that would be a satisfying tier.
I think that this last round of awards we did, I think we had a grantee who received $1,667, and then I think there were several at the $3,000 mark as well. And so we did see grant awards below the $5,000.
But was that their ask?
No, right, not their full ask,
what
that's correct.
I'm getting at, because we're here to fit a need, and I know that we can't satisfy the collective need But there's some bullet points here that I feel, again, that will really put the community in their ability to effectively move and to serve the community, puts it at a grave limitation. And the tiered system is one of them. I just feel that we need more time, well, I need more time to really think this through. I believe the amount of people who responded to the questions that we asked about this, that was very limited. I think we get more applicants than we got respondents. So I think that we need to continue to ask questions in the community so we see exactly how this will affect. Because the process has, of course, been a burden on a lot of organizations, and we saw it really, really bad this time because we just don't have enough money. But I don't feel like the structure that we're putting in place will bring any more relief to our community.
Yeah, I went back and looked at the grants that we awarded this past year, or earlier this year, and there were some on the very low amount, and then there were some that were over 15. There were, I don't know, 3 or 4 that were over 15. So I also was going to ask about the tiers, and I realize this is your recommendation, but you're also saying you're just putting it out as a straw man for purposes of conversation. So I think that's a really good question, and maybe we would want to actually go, there would be a few grants available actually at $20,000 and maybe more available at 10 than at the 5 level, just to, give groups the opportunity for a little more capacity. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And you're right, Julie, we were, working with the community.
Yeah.
There was consensus around these recommendations. I don't know if everyone was cheering necessarily, but everyone understands that we're trying to get some kind of like a path forward with these. So we put these recommendations together, but yeah, right now we are very comfortable with having the discussions on how best to move forward.
Right.
Because I also read that that with the process that we have in place right now, I think that what people really wanted, they wanted more transparency, and they wanted to know how we came up with the awards that we came up with. So I feel like what we have here, I appreciate it greatly, but I don't think from the respondents, I don't think that we're actually meeting what they would like to see. I don't think they really are scrutinizing the process outside of let's be more transparent about how you come up with your, what is your reasoning? I think that's what they want.
So maybe we can not vote on this today, but maybe ask you all to, convene a meeting of SPF grantees and others who would be interested to allow for a little more in-depth review and conversation about this proposal. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to ask a question around bullet 3, to prioritize applications by organizations working in partnership with Asheville City Schools, because I know this time, I believe that we did get a little feedback from the superintendent, and I think we need more clarity around what that the board and also the superintendent will be looking for from applicants having to do with youth mentoring programs and the achievement gap. So I don't think that was a very open conversation, and I don't believe that the community actually knew that we were working in partnership with the superintendent and others.
Well, and I'm again, what we don't know is how deep the inquiry went into the city school system. If it was just to the superintendent and that sort of senior staff, I mean, I can't remember which group it was, but there was clearly a group that was working with teachers that but in the spreadsheet, it said that there was no information about them working with the school system. And I'm like, well, even I know that they work with the school system.
Because I
so-
think the school system wants the feedback. They want a feedback loop with the organizations. They want some attendance, some things around attendance and behavioral management and measuring. So they just want to be in the loop with the organizations, and that takes, a partnership has to be cultivated there. So I think that is one thing that I would like spelled out better.
So I think we can, when you have this meeting, if you can ask the groups, how, we need to figure out a way for the groups to sort of indicate that they are working in partnership with the city school system and who they're working with in the city school system. And then kind of on the flip side, when we go to the school system, we need to make sure that we're spreading that question, or that they are then spreading that question broadly enough in their system to get the right answers.
And who sets the standard for how that looks? Because an organization can say that, yes, I'm in conversation with a few teachers, but the standard coming from the board and the leadership can be a lot different on what they need from organizations.
And definitely as we work towards some kind of standard policy to do that, I think Erica Germer would like to speak. She was at the meeting that happened in October, November.
Sure.
Hello, Erica Germer from the Community Development Division. I was involved with Megan Gaskell of communicating with Melissa Hecht from the school system, and she was the one who was doing outreach and kind of asking and the teachers, administration of various schools. I do also so you guys covered that, but the reason I wanted to come up is that in December when we announced the awards, the opening of the applications, there was a clear communication with grantees and applicants that we were going to be communicating with the school system, so I just want to make sure that you know that we weren't trying to go
So
behind community members or anything
No,
like
that's
that.
fine.
That's great.
Okay.
That's great. But to Shanika's point, like when we say that we want to prioritize organizations working in partnership with the school system, we need to define a little bit more about what that means. Okay, that's a good conversation. Anything else?
Just in the interim, while we're stewing over this, and I'm assuming what I'm hearing is give us some more time as well, I'd like to possibly send my ideas to you, my suggestions. I don't have any to put out in the public realm right now, but I'll definitely send some emails.
Yeah. All right, well, if we, and Paul, let me just clarify something. You said the last bullet about make funding available for 2 years versus every year, which I think is great. It gives organizations some stability, allows them to actually, really invest in their programs in different ways. But that would need to wait because we would need to allocate money for 2 years, which maybe we can do in this next time around, but we won't know that necessarily for this first year.
Correct.
And it probably actually doesn't necessarily make sense for this first year because we probably need to see how this works. So, okay.
Well, we appreciate the feedback, and we'll start to try to iron out
Yeah.
some guardrails for a policy.
Right. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments here, let me just go ahead and open this topic up for public comment. And you're welcome to come talk to us. Hopefully, you know that the staff will be convening a meeting where you can say anything you want about this process. But we're happy to hear from you too. I would welcome that. Anybody?
No one has anything I do that one.
Crickets. Okay. Keith.
So at one point in time, we were having conversations about participatory budgeting. And some people were under the assumption that participatory budgeting would only be something used for capital. And I was of the notion that it can be whatever you want it to be. And so I would be interested in seeing, is that a possibility for this process as well? At least a portion of it or all of it, but the exploration of such.
We had talked about setting aside, I think, Nicole, this was your suggestion, actually, setting aside a portion of the funds. I think your suggestion was maybe around sort of smoothing the edges of the grants. But, yeah, I'd certainly be open to that. I mean, again, if we're narrowing the focus and I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not hearing any objection up here to this recommendation of narrowing it to the recommended area, which is eliminating the achievement gap and supporting youth development in Asheville City Schools. So that's that is, we now have 6 criteria, and essentially it's getting, I would argue, maybe all but 2 of those are going away. And that's a pretty big change. I'm not hearing any objection to that up here right now. I would say if we have an objection to that, if we think that's not the direction, that we should say that right now, but I'm not hearing any of that.
I
So,
would affirm the direction.
okay, great, all right. So that, I think you got affirmation that that's the right way
That's
to go. So that is, again, like probably half the groups that got funded last year or in this last round would not be eligible for funding in this scenario that we're talking about. So that might, to Keith's point, make it a little, it might make it a little bit easier to experiment with participatory budgeting if we're dealing with a much narrower focus. So happy for you to explore that.
That would be great. I did have one question, if you'd like us to continue to work with the equity team on this as we move forward between community development and equity.
I think that's very helpful.
Okay.
So when you say that, it registered different with me. So when we say that we make the funding available every 2 years versus every year,
So you get a 2-year grant
okay,
instead of a 1-year grant.
but we still have the same amount of strategic partnership funding, which would be under $3,000.
Well, under $300,000.
$300,000. I think we need to look into that, because when we're looking to build in, we're investing in organizations that have massive work to do. So having that year in between could be detrimental to their,
So I think what Paul is saying is that we would, instead of requiring groups to come back in every year, that we would have the opportunity for either some or all of the groups to receive two-year grants.
Reoccurring.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they wouldn't have to come back in the intervening year.
I get it.
That's,
Thank you.
yeah. But we can't, unless we do something, which we could consider when the time comes in the spring, as a council, I think we could make that would need to be a budget amendment, and we would make that commitment that we would hold funds for 2-year grants. So I'd certainly be open to having that conversation at that time. Yeah.
We just saw that as a best practice in other communities, so
It's, as someone who lives on grant dollars, getting a multi-year grant is just a sweet thing, so yes. Okay, so there was nobody who wanted to say anything? All right, do you have what you need from us to take the next step?
yep, I
All right.
appreciate it.
And then do we think this might come back to us in maybe August?
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you for that work, and Kimberly, thanks for being engaged in that as well. All right, Luigi, talk to us about Luigi.
I can stay. So hopefully everyone's got the draft Luigi that went through AHAC in March. And so with community development, part of our challenge and our workload is to always take a look at these policies to see how they're being used, if they're being used, if they're being utilized, if it's working for the developers, as well as the community and our need for affordable housing. So hopefully in front of you, you've got a little bit of an analysis on the current land use incentive grant. We actually took a look with the current multifamily apartment complex to just see if they had added affordable units, what does that look like? Was there enough of an incentive on the table to get the developer to add some percentage of affordable units to this development? So you have that in front of you where it kind of shows that over a certain period of time, if we're asking for 20% of the units at 60% AMI for 20 years, there's the savings provided by the Luigi over the 5 years, as this applicant, again, real-world example, would have gotten 50 points for 5 years of the rebate grant. There's a savings there, but if you look at the difference of what they, by providing a market rate unit versus what it would be as an affordable unit, over that 5 years, it's a loss of revenue of $1.3 million. And so it's trying to be like, is our land use incentive grant, meeting a developer halfway to incentivize them to be able to put some level of affordable units into the multifamily complex? And if you look at that over a 20-year period, because this would be for 20-year length of period, you see where it's as if the developer is leaving nearly $4 million on the table versus what the land use incentive grant brings back. And a similar analysis for the 20% of the unit at 80% AMI for 20 years, to where while there is a little bit of a match there, you're asking for 20 years of affordability, and it's money kind of left on the table. So if any of that makes sense, it's as if to choose between doing a market rate unit and an affordable unit leaves the developer the choice where they're like, well, the land use incentive grant looks great, but it's really not meeting me halfway. It's not providing the income over the level of years that they're looking for affordability. So when we did that analysis in coordination with Ben Woody and his team down in Development Services, it was about the same time we were looking at the land use incentive grant. We've been making notes over several months about things we'd like to perhaps update with some needs in the community. So if you look at the staff report, and some changes that we recommended, and I think that there's a possibility to put the draft Luigi up on the screen. What we thought, based on the analysis, was instead of every 10 points equaling 1 year, that every 5 points could equal 1 year of property tax grant abatement. And also looking at a maximum length of property abatement grant for 20 years plus 1, minimum of 20 years of affordability. We added a walkability score, additional points for serving low-income individuals and families under 60% AMI, additional length of tenant affordability, and an update in the points awarded. Additional points for accepting tenant-based vouchers. This is an issue in our community where the Housing Authority has those vouchers, but they're not being utilized in the community because of the market rate rents that people can get right now versus what a voucher is worth. We also thought it was important to add points for individuals by taking them off the homeless by name list, which is really important to the success of our COC grant, so we added points for that. I think working with AHAC and community members, they thought it was also very important to give extra points for doing things in the Central Business District, as that cost of development is certainly higher. But as we promote this live, work, and play and want everyone to kind of live close to where they work, with the committee and community thought extra points for Central Business District. Also added brownfield, energy efficiency, and points for rehab redevelopment. The work that's been done in the past with community development has been great for this land use incentive grant. And I think a lot of the bones are great. It's just only been utilized 3 times, and that was the reason we wanted to take a look at it to see how can we get more developers at the table to take advantage of this potential tool. We've got City and Land Housing Trust Fund. Luigi's really important. And then we also took a minute just to streamline the policy itself and the guidance so that the actual chart is all on one page, followed by the second page, which actually is a description of what those points are for, just to try to streamline the process so that it was easier for developers. A lot of the developers we spoke to like the idea of the policy, but when they see what was 9 pages, it can be a little bit overwhelming. We've offered to help people score, but that's one of the reasons we kind of just made it a little bit more user-friendly. Mm-hmm. But those were some suggestions, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the proposed changes, whether it be every 5 points equaling 1 year versus 10, or any of the smaller changes in the actual chart where we tried to add in points for the need in the community.
So I just have a question. What's the deal with the 20 years plus 1?
That was a recommendation from AHAC, and while I pride myself on some knowledge, I'm not sure. So it could be 21 years, which is what it sounds like, but I just left that language in.
That is what it sounds like. Does anybody know why it wouldn't just be 21 instead of 20 plus 1?
Yeah, 20 years plus 1.
And there was some strong recommendation from AHAC that it be worded that way.
Yes.
Really? Were you at that meeting?
We can follow up.
Well, that seems very odd. Nobody else can illuminate us? This isn't some weird property law thing, some tax thing? Okay, that was my only question. Questions, comments from you all? Yeah, I think I think this obviously looks good. I'm trusting AHAC here since those guys are deep in the weeds of all of this and wanting to make it work, and the staff, of course. So again, we're going to be voting on this, so I'll open it up for public comment. If anybody has any public comment on this. Yeah, Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Heimbaugh. I'm from Bountiful Cities. I'm also with the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust. I do want to thank staff for increasing the length of affordability within these recommendations. I think that's really exciting to move from 20 and 30 to 30 and 50. I think that's a huge step forward. So I just want to say that I think that these look really great, and I appreciate all the work that's been done on this.
Great. Anybody else? All right, do we have oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Wyatt Stevens. I'm here both as a citizen and as well as an attorney who represents developers, and for over 15 years I've represented Mountain Housing Opportunities. Our firm also does work with Habitat for Humanity. Affordable housing is an incredible challenge in this community, as we all know, and the models to address it include the tax credit work that Mountain Housing does and has done very effectively. That's a cumbersome, expensive process that often requires coming to the city or the county for grant money on top of the tax credits that they get. We saw that with a number of projects, including most recently Eagle Market. Then you've got the Habitat model, highly effective, but doesn't create that many affordable homes. They do great work, and yet we still have this incredible problem. This Luigi Grant program makes common sense because when you have a developer that has to borrow money from a bank or a commercial lender, they have to get a return on their investment. To Mr. D'Angelo's point, they look at the numbers and they look at how much they can charge per room or per apartment or per house, and they put that into their pro forma. And if they are committed, as many of them are, just because it's the right thing to do to providing affordable housing, as soon as they do that, it skews their numbers. And so the question is, where can they make up the difference? And if it's not a tax credit project like a Mountain Housing project, if you don't have charitable contributions or donated time like you do in the Habitat model, then you look to programs like the Luigi Grant to say, okay, that's a way that doesn't directly cost the city money because it's the tax on the increase in value, but you've got a developer who's increasing the value of a piece of property, but in exchange is avoiding the taxes for a period of time. And so it is interesting to me as a citizen now to have watched the evolution of this program and see how few developers have actually taken advantage of it. And so I commend Mr. D'Angelo and his team and the city for taking another look at it to try to make it more expansive, more liberal, and in some ways also longer periods of time, tenant affordability for 30 years and 50 years, because often 20 is not enough. And so I would just strongly encourage this committee to vote in favor of this amendment. I think it's a good plan. I'm optimistic that some of my clients may be able to take advantage of it, and we will create some more affordable housing, which we very much need. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I did want to point out just three small things. The previous land use incentive grant had fee rebates involved in it as well. We've been separating those out, and we're working with DSD on a separate policy for the fee rebates and in coordination with sustainability. So the developers could take advantage of that as well, whether they're nonprofit, mission-driven, or for-profit developers. So that'll be separated. That'll be coming back soon. If you noticed on the last page of the policy, we did add some attachments that'll be coming just so that the developer, the property manager understands, kind of what an application looks like, the agreement itself, also how we anticipate as we do now, a property report that comes through annually. Everyone can get a look at what that looks like. So they have the documents in advance, that they'll have an idea of how this will work and the information we're looking for every year as we do the compliance and monitoring to make sure the units stay affordable. And then lastly, there were a couple highlighted areas in yellow. I think there's just 2 on the first page. I just didn't know if there any conversation around those. AHAC didn't have much to say, but if you look under to qualify, the proposed development must consist of 3 or more dwelling units for rent. I didn't know if anyone had thoughts on that number. And then the second bullet point is at least 10% of the units must be affordable, again, as a stepping stone to walk into the policy. I don't know if there was a change there, perhaps 20%, but we wanted to put that out there as we were doing the update. There were a couple highlighted areas. Thanks, Whitney. I think there's just those 2, and that's just for conversation, to see if y'all had any guidance.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not 3, I would say it should be 2. I don't know that I'd want to increase it any more. But to some, I mean, you know, I think I might even be fine with it going down to 2 if people wanted to build, if someone wanted to build a duplex and make half of it an affordable unit for, you know, 30. I don't know how you would, anyway. I think that would make sense to me. On the 10%, that's, you know, typically our threshold is 20, so that's a good question. You know, I would love to say 20, but, you know, what I don't know is what then does. I mean, we're not, I will say I am not an expert on the market. I think I'm well on record as not being the strongest in math, and now having been declared that at a city council meeting recently. So, you know, far be it from me and probably even us to sort of, to some degree, impose a requirement that, I guess what I wouldn't want to do is raise the bar to the point that the project wouldn't be used again. And I don't know if you have a way to sort of ferret that out with the groups that you've been talking to and the developers you've been talking to. If we made that 20%, would that kill it? Would that?
Well, I know when it comes to community development, we want to make sure that anybody, developers, whether it's nonprofit, mission-driven, or for-profit, like give them something to walk into the door and then see, you know, how else a project materializes or what we're asking. I think it's fine to stay at 10. I think most developers we're talking to, we're kind of doing the 20-80-20, 20% of the units at 80% AMI for 20 years, and even more particularly trying, once we build relationships with developers, trying to do perhaps a 20-60-20, where 20% of units at 60% AMI for 20 years. But I think if it stays, it's fine, because I know for staff, we don't want to have any initial barriers that if somebody immediately puts the policy down, like, okay, I think we can work with all types of developers, and most of what we hear is 20% of the units is what people are trying to achieve.
That's
So it can stay 10, and we could always reevaluate it later.
Right.
I just didn't know if it was a discussion.
right. Well, and I think we're, to some degree, we're kind of set, at council, we've kind of established the policy unofficially that if you need a conditional zoning for a multifamily, you really need to be considering 20%. So are you guys good with leaving those?
Yes.
Or leaving that the way it is? Okay.
I'm good with it.
Okay.
But it seems like it would be beneficial to have some continuity across all of our tools to say at 20%. But you have to let us know what 20%, if it would make this less attractive.
I think it'll be good for us to, we'll keep an eye on that. If that's okay, leave it at 10 if that's comfortable with committee, and then we'll keep an eye on it. But we definitely agree with the consistency across the policies. It makes it easier for staff to remember all the different AMIs, but we're definitely looking at the 20-80-20 to start negotiating with the developer, and I feel like that's where they're at, but we're comfortable leaving it at 10 for now.
Also, I get the, I get wanting to have it at 10% to maybe encourage others to step into the door. But like Julie said, notwithstanding the conditional zonings or anything like that, but 20% seems to be the bottom. That seems to be the baseline, and that seems to be what everybody is sticking to. It would be interesting to see if this would bring anybody else in to want to apply for Luigi, But depending on how these projects come about, I mean, I could literally see myself in my mind thinking, even though you may have come in at 10%, in my mind, I'm still thinking 20% is probably the floor. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with leaving it at 10%, but I can't necessarily personally say that I would entertain anything at that level unless it was just a really just spiffy project that says, okay, well, 10% of 100 ain't much, but 10% of 300 or 400 is a big difference.
Right, that's right, yeah. Okay. So, all right, so do we have a motion to, and what do we want to do about the 3 or more dwelling units? Do we want to drop that to 2, or, I mean, is there
I think staff would be fine if you wanted to change that to 2.
to 2? Okay, then I would recommend we change that to 2. Okay, so we need a motion to pass this on, to recommend this to council.
Make a motion to recommend the changes to the land use incentive grant policy on to council.
Okay, motion second, and that is all approved.
With the added changes.
The change, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just a note on this, also at this conference last week, I went to several sessions on affordable housing, and there some new ideas emerged from that I will want to maybe sit down and talk to you and Deborah about, just some really interesting things that are happening in other places.
That would be great.
So, all right. I think what is next is, so we're moving into our housing trust fund. Is Bowcatcher first? I just don't have the agenda right in front of me. Okay. Yep, there's Bowcatcher. All right. You
Okay.
again.
Yes, so the Simpsons Street project, working with a local developer, Kirk Booth, who's here today, who can answer any questions as well. We'll kind of just dive into the staff report, if that's okay. This was on Simpson Street, originally proposed to be 60 units, I believe, where there was an original loan amount of $300,000 in March of 2016. A request was brought forward in January of 2017, expanding the number of affordable units to 70, as well as adding to the Housing Trust Fund request of $350,000, so making that 70 units and a Housing Trust Fund loan of $650,000, targeting 60% of area median income or below. The project does possess funding from Buncombe County as well as Home Trust Bank, and regarding where they are as with the Luigi, which Kirk is looking at for the Luigi, an estimated value of $248,710 paid out in annual increments over 11 years, as well as $70,000 in a fee rebate. He's come back to us today with some changes in his development that came out of having to add a dry sprinkler system, to see an additional request of $650,000 from Housing Trust Fund, which would take that up to $1.3 million in Housing Trust Fund loan for the 70 units to be paid back over a period of 20 years, and I believe it's interest-only payments, and then what would be a balloon payment at 20 years, depending on how they're refinancing or Kirk's moving forward, perhaps. Looking at the amount that it is now, it comes in at about with that 1.3 million, it comes in at $18,500 per unit approximately. If you look at all in with our other tools of Luigi and fee rebate, it's about $23,000, so it falls in line with our Housing Trust Fund policy. And staff recommended to approve the additional amount request of $650,000 with the similar terms of the original $650,000, whether that be a separate loan or in addition to the loan that's out there. I don't know if anyone has opinion on either way, but staff would recommend moving it forward. He's got 40 units CO'd now, and this will help him complete the additional 30. And as a note, too, we are seeing a lot of this conversation with developers. Again, nonprofit, mission-driven, or for-profit, with costs rising. This kind of tends to come out of that addition of the more expansive dry sprinkler system that was asked for. But we are seeing there's rising costs, and a couple other developers have reached out about adding potentially in the future, about adding to their award amounts that they have now. So just as a point of note in the market, that these costs, whether it be labor, land, materials, tariffs, et cetera, really are, continuing to rise where we thought about 6 months ago, we were seeing a little bit of a stabilization. So for just a note on the market.
Right, okay. So let me actually start first. Kirk, is there anything you'd like to tell us? Or do you all have any questions for Kirk, who's here?
No, would like to hear from Kirk.
Anything you want to share with us that's not in the staff report or you want to emphasize?
I think Paul did a great job. I'm just realized this is a all one-bedroom, 100% affordable, 60% AMI project. There's nothing like it. Unfortunately, it's an interpretation of a sprinkler rule between the powers that be. We wish we knew about it before. We didn't. And as these things go, just one cost just creates a lot of other problems that make costs rise. But I'll be happy to answer any other comments or.
What's the total estimated cost of the project as it stands now with the addition?
The cost will be about 5.1 million with the addition.
And Paul, so we have this funding request, and then we have another one. And if anybody looks at our Housing Trust Fund spreadsheet, you will see that we're basically out of dough. So Paul, just talk a minute about about how we are going to pay for things.
Sure. So right now, everyone should have in the materials for today, have the financial reports that shows right now we have a cash balance of almost $2 million. But if you do take a look at some money that's going to be going out with projects that we feel are going to be moving forward, whether that be the holdback to Simpson with the $65,000 that would come back or we would pay out, the 360 Hilliard, which is now $1.4 million, a tax credit property of $600,000 that's going to be moving forward, $650,000 today with Kirk. MHO might be bringing back another project, requesting some funding, and as well as there's a second request on today's agenda with Homeward Bound. If you look at all of that, plus the $500,000 that we'll get from Council July 1st for the general fund, funds that we get into Housing Trust Fund, if all of those came in and that money went out, we'd be down about $3.2 million. You add in the $5 million that is separated out from the bond, and it leaves us with about $1.8 million. So a little bit of staff concern with this funding issue, but I think our team and staff feels like if these projects come forward and there's affordable units in it, that this is what this program is for. It'd be great to see, with the city-owned land and housing, or Luigi, if we can, mix up so it's not so much Housing Trust Fund, but this funding is here to build affordable housing and support affordable housing. So, but it does create that longer-term discussion, similar to the cost overruns that we're seeing from developers. But there is a concern long-term of how we're funding Housing Trust Fund.
And do we have money in the CIP for affordable housing? Sometimes we do. I just don't know if that's an annual allocation.
I don't think it's annual.
It's every 2 years, we put $2 million in
Okay.
the CIP for affordable housing.
And right now, we've got, I think, a balance of about 1.3 or 1.4 million. We did $1 million came out of it for the Lee Walker Heights support for that project. And so right now, I think we're at about 1.3, 1.4.
Okay. So with that, and then with what's left, we'd have about 2.5 maybe. So running out of money is not, it's not imminent, but we're sort of getting tight as projects come forward, which is what we want. So this is good.
Exactly.
It's a high quality problem to have, but it does tee up the concern that some of us have been expressing for a while, that we need to have another conversation about generating new revenue for affordable housing, whether that's another bond or something else. I don't know, but.
So my question at the last time we met to you all were, I think we were here with 360 Hilliard, and I asked a similar question to the developer that I just asked to Mr. Booth here. What is the estimated total cost of the project? And his project is hovering around $5 million. The last project, which was 360 Hilliard, was about $12 million. And my question to staff was, what are the opportunities for the city of Asheville to start exploring whether or not we want to try to do some of these projects on our own funding our own projects with utilization of possibly LOBs or SOBs, considering that 1.2 million can get us 12 million.
I know that that came up at the last meeting, so we are having some initial discussions about where you, committee or staff would see the community development department playing that role. And we are looking at ways, and we'll start looking at other cities that might possibly be doing it with staff direction.
Yeah, one of the things that would be helpful is if this committee as a whole wants to recommend that we look into that. We are planning a workshop in August to bring in affordable housing developers to talk about their challenges and to try to understand more about the financing that's required to make these projects happen. And so we had planned on including some ideas around that, or some things that would come out of that would address that question.
Okay, with you asking us that now, does that mean that everything comes to a screeching halt, that we have to make an official ask of you in order to continue on that road? Because if that's the case, then I'll be happy to do that now.
That would be helpful.
All right, I would officially like to ask that staff look into the city of Asheville utilizing LOBs and SOBs to produce affordable housing, whether it be as a lender or as a developer in its own right. That is an official motion. I guess I'd need a second.
Yeah, I'll second that. Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
I guess there's already two of us, so, yeah. Yeah, and just to go back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the programs that I want to bring to you is, I think it's in Portland, Oregon. The city of Portland is actually paying to build ADUs. They completely pay to build the ADU if the homeowner will reserve that ADU for a low-income family, or I think in that case it was actually a homeless family, for a period of at least 5 years. And then at the end of that period, the homeowner gets the full use of that. So it's short-term affordable housing, but it is using direct city dollars, to build that 100%. So
Would you
again,
like them to look into that?
it-
Would I
yeah.
need to amend my motion?
No.
Okay. It sounded like a good idea to me.
Yeah, I mean, there are interesting things happening in other cities. There's also, interesting stuff happening with mobile homes that don't look like mobile homes, because I think a lot of the objection to mobile homes is around the aesthetics of them, and so if you can make them look different, then, it could be a totally different situation. So, yeah. Okay, so any other questions, comments about Bowcatcher? The Simpson Street request? And any public comment on this project? All right, do we have a motion to move this on to council?
Make a motion to approve the request by Kirk Booth.
Second.
Yeah, I was going to read the whole
good
motion.
project.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we started seeing, so there was a motion and a second, all in favor. Yeah, when we started seeing per unit subsidies in the more like $60,000 range, this is a breath of fresh air. So thanks for being persistent. Yeah. All right, our next one is Short, Michigan, I believe. And that is also Paul. We need to get you some help.
That's right. Everyone, several staff members are at the National Community Development Association Conference in Jacksonville.
Got it.
A deeper dive of knowledge into CDBG Home, other HUD programs. So
Great.
They're down there dividing and conquering. So appreciate that. So the next item has to do with looking for a recommendation in support of a proposal of Homeward Bound to utilize Housing Trust Fund monies to acquire and rehabilitate a multifamily property located at 296 Short Michigan Avenue. The property is located at 296 Short Michigan Avenue. It's on approximately 1 acre site possessing 5 buildings containing 11 separate apartment units. The current owner partners with Homeward Bound and the Asheville Housing Authority to accept permanent supportive housing and housing choice vouchers. At the present time, 6 of the 11 units are occupied by voucher holders. The remaining 5 units are unoccupied and require rehabilitation to be brought up to HUD habitability standards. The owner has informed Homeward Bound of his intention to sell, putting the property's long-term affordability in jeopardy. In order to prevent this, Homeward Bound has negotiated a contract to purchase a property for a sum of $545,000. Homeward Bound has intentions to increase their capacity as a developer and operator of supportive housing in the Nashville area, with the project as a reflection of their strategy and their successful strategy of permanent supportive housing. Currently, they've got an agreement for a purchase of sale till October 31st of 2019. They presented a $910,000 project budget to community staff that we had a chance to look at, which includes a $530,000 loan request from Housing Trust Fund, kind of putting us as the first one into the project, primarily used to acquire the property. The remainder of the project budget will be drawn down from a pending commercial loan and federal home funding. As some people might know, the home funding allocations that happened a few months back, I think Homeward Bound requested $300,000, but received $100,000 from the Housing Consortium. The application, again, is in negotiations with a few banks to get the $280,000 in additional funding, and the remainder of the project budget will be used to rehabilitate all 5 structures to a condition that meets HUD habitability standards. And so they are looking at a request of a $530,000 Housing Trust Fund loan to be deferred for 40 years with 0% interest. And there is a slight exception to the policy, but community development staff supports this exception to the Housing Trust Fund policy to recommend moving forward with a Housing Trust Fund loan of $530,000. And if you look at the subsidy for that, if you just looked at it as the 5 additional units at about $100,000, if you look at all 11 units, it's at about 48. But if I always kind of bring up LAS, the consultants that we brought in to understand the support needed for affordable units, and when you look at the folks that are targeting the lowest AMIs and the hardest work out there, like the Housing Authority does in Homeward Bound, it can be upwards of $100,000 a unit. But again, staff recommend it's based on their success of permanent supportive housing, as well as there's potential opportunity with adjacent land that the developer, Homeward Bound, may be able to talk about a little bit more, that could be exciting to add units as well as they do this very difficult work and do it very well. And Homeward Bound representatives are here today.
Okay, great. Any questions for Paul before we bring up Homeward Bound? Okay. Emily, Brian, anybody?
So Brian Methvin, I'm on the board of Homeward Bound. The one thing Paul didn't mention in his report was that we are proposing that the term of affordability for this be 99 years. So this is really good. We're trying to create a permanent community asset here for people that are at the 30% and below AMI level, which, as you know, is where we really struggle as a community to provide additional housing, particularly decent housing.
Right. And the upfits that you'll do will be to all the units, right?
Yes.
Not just the 5 that are.
That's correct.
vacant.
We're going to rehabilitate all the units. We've had a home inspection done. We've got a long list of repairs that need to be done. A lot of it's upgrading the heating and cooling systems, energy efficiency, as well as replacing dated kitchen and bathrooms. Those are the big things that we're doing.
Okay. Just since I'm thinking about it, please reach out to Duke Energy on the HVAC.
Yes, we've, city staff's been great at connecting us with all sorts of different partners to help us with other grants and partnering opportunities to be able to do these retrofits as cost effectively as possible.
Super. I had a question, and this is a small, relatively small development, but clearly the trend in affordable housing these days is mixed income.
Yes.
And that's not what you're proposing for this.
Yes.
Again, it may be so small that it doesn't really matter, but did you think about that and just say, no, this is the need, and so this is where we're going to be? Or?
Yeah, the challenge that we face is that in order to there's such a shortage of units that you can get at what we're being able to pay for our continuum of care grants, that we could have made the loan smaller from the Housing Trust Fund if we had gone with more market rate units. But our desperate shortage is in that 30% AMI level. And to be honest with you, when we have clients that are transitioning from homelessness into housing, there's a 2 or 3 year transition period. And for this population, that segregation is actually better for them, and it enables them to stay in, more likely to stay in housing. It makes it easier from a case management perspective.
I see, okay, all right.
And we do have opportunities at this property. Once we investigate some sewer issues, we may be able to add one more structure to this unit. And then there are 2 adjacent landlocked properties that are owned by the Eblin Charitable Trust. And we may be able to acquire those properties to expand it further.
Will you have some sort of case management on site, like living on site?
We won't have anyone living on site, but what we're planning on doing is as a case manager on site every day. So we'll be out there visiting with each of the clients on site every day.
And I think I read somewhere, maybe in the staff report or in your PowerPoint, that all of the people who occupy are moving from homelessness to housing, but you have one slot for a person who might just be a voucher holder?
They're currently a voucher holder. Ironically, they are a former Homeward Bound client we had several years ago, and they graduated from our program.
Okay, so this person is currently.
Right, and we got them a HACA voucher, and we'll continue to have them be a resident in the complex for as long as they would like.
And how many, I'm looking, but I'll just ask you, are these one-bedroom units or?
So there are 9 one-bedrooms and 3 two-bedrooms. We've got a contractor currently looking about the feasibility of splitting 2 of the 2 bedrooms into efficiency units. So we may be able to create 13 units within our rehabilitation budget. 2-bedroom apartments actually are somewhat problematic for us because when you have extra space, our clients, because they lease the apartments, will sometimes invite other people and try to sublet out those apartments, and that just, those other bedrooms, that creates problems. And so we're trying to think about a way to add more units to the complex within the same amount of cost.
Right. And again, I know we hear from folks sometimes that, we need to remember that we need to build housing for families as well as individuals, but thinking back to our point-in-time count, that some astronomical percentage of our homeless are single people.
Almost all single. And so this real shortage of housing in the market is at the 1-bedroom level. So the project that Kirk's working on is a great project for the community.
Right.
That's where the supply is. What we end up having to do is we rent 2 bedrooms sometimes and have to supplement with private fundraising dollars the additional rent over what HUD will cover for a 2-bedroom apartment. So there is a desperate shortage of 1-bedroom apartments and efficiencies. I think the other shortage in the community-wise is more at the 3-bedroom level. That's when we get families that are homeless. HACA is probably, the Housing Authority is probably the only place that we can go to get a 3-bedroom unit.
And if you were to expand to the 2 adjacent properties, how many units do you think you can get? They're each 3/4 acre lots. We could probably fit on another 10 units of housing on each of them. Because again, we would build 400 square foot efficiency apartment, and then probably you could pick 6 or 8 in a unit, in a structure. And how far into the future do you see that happening?
It really depends on where we are with our 80-unit complex, and the Eblin Trust owns the land, so we'd have to get an acquisition for them. They've told us they're interested in selling the land to us, but can't do it at this time because of some issue, which I'm not aware of what that issue is, but hopefully we can resolve that into the future. But there's no other way to get access to those properties other than through ours. So we're hopeful that we can make that work.
Right, okay.
Just one clarifying question. The proposed budget for the total project is just under $1 million?
Yep.
That's right? Okay.
And that's essentially little over half for acquisition, and then the rest for upfit.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, any other questions? Or a motion?
Just one other thing, I would do want to compliment city staff. They have really been super helpful to us in this entire project, particularly Andrew Mahone, who's not here today, has been awesome at helping us work through all the financial details on this. So my compliments to staff.
Good to hear, thanks.
I make a motion to approve the Homeward Bound project.
Second?
All right, we are all in favor of that then. And I guess we'll see what happens with home funding and whether that changes anything, but obviously we're committed to this, so.
Yeah, so we would just make an adjustment for whatever additional.
Yeah, great, super. All right, I didn't ask for a public comment on that, sorry. Okay. All right, so I think we're done with our new business. Old business, any old business to come before us? Or public comment? Okay, come on up, give us your name, and you've got 3 minutes.
I'd actually make the request for the 10 minutes because I have a group of people with us.
Okay.
And I believe
So let me
that,
just see who those 3, I need 3 hands, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, great.
and also I think staff has a presentation for us.
Super.
Oh, perfect. No, we went to the public, general public comment. No worries. The timing of this is particularly interesting because of the comments Councilman Young made last time, and my apologies. I'm Drew Crawford with DIY Tiny, and your ask for creative solutions, and then today's comments from Councilwoman Mayfield about there are options out there and we need to start talking about them. That's what really brings me here today.
I don't, it's just caught on a corner there. Yeah. There you go. There we go.
And
All right.
use the areas. Again, I'm Drew Crawford with DIY Tiny, and I've been kind of dropping hints to city staff for some period of time now that, hey, we have tiny houses in Asheville and I want to talk about it. But I also learned today how difficult it is to really have those conversations until we get direction from elected officials. So you may remember me. My neighbor did a presentation about the 6-story hotel, which is being constructed next doors. I'm the guy with the pigs. Thank you guys very much for that fence. That is going to make a really big difference as we upgrade both our campground area and really hide the neighboring hotel from our work. But we're really here in East Asheville to talk about tiny houses. And in the bottom right hand, you can see kind of on the left there, there's a school bus with Eric and Kate. She works for the Park Service. He works in environmental health. In the middle, that is Megan. She's moved on, but she works with animals, worked for the Humane Society for a period of time. And then Drew and Sierra on the right are Asheville natives. She's in school, they've been in school, do local woodworking. And so these are real people living in our community. But first, some definitions so we're on the same page. HUD uses 400 square feet as a benchmark. So tiny houses, generally things under 400 square feet. Tiny houses on wheels, RV tiny house on wheels, typically 8'6", 12 to 40 foot long. Most are in the 24 foot long range. And if you want it to fit under the bridges in town, it'll be 13.6 high. And we know that this can be used as a tool to address affordable housing. And we have the code in place already. We know what the tools are. And there's rumors that the state is actually making even more accommodations for tiny houses. Most of that work is done right now for us through NOAA, the National Organization of Alternative Housing. They provide us a pathway for third-party inspections that meets the state fire marshal's needs and is really a better tool than the typical RV industry because every unit is inspected rather than the manufacturing process. So it's actual inspection process rather than an industry-driven inspection for the facility. But all of this is not why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about the other challenge for tiny houses. This is how do we manage zoning? And I like to think about it in 2 buckets. I'd like you to think about it in 2 buckets. One is temporary, typically defined as under 180 days. One is permanent, when we start putting in a foundation. HUD's got their rules for RVs and manufactured housing. We've got now NOAA for code-compliant buildings that are in the small category. And a really, really astute planning official asked the question, what happens on the 181st day that makes a temporary housing unsafe in some kind of way? So these are the kind of issues that I really want to start engaging you, the city, and talking about so we can have alternate pathways and creative solutions for tiny houses and affordable housing. We have tools. We have energy efficiency and durability and repairability benchmarks. Tiny houses actually create value for people as opposed to just forever renting. And we have this concept of these are still mobile. We mentioned earlier that mobile homes is a term that hasn't been used since the 60s, but we kind of want to put the mobile back in home. And this last bullet point, there's really interesting things happening right now. There's a lot of money, Goldman Sachs, other big investors, buying up trailer parks. That's the colloquial term for it. And these people cannot move their home for the value of the home. So the prices just keep going up. Investor buys it, the rent goes up, the people who own the home can't move. Is it affordable? Yes. Lot and utilities around $400. If you build it yourself, the materials are around $25,000. If you have someone build it for you new, around $45,000 per unit. That works out to about $800 per month. If I use my 30% rule, that's about $14 per hour. So we really are getting close to that 60% threshold. I tend to use the term workforce housing, but we really are below that, closer to that 60% mark. How do we reach some of those? There's conversations here we can have about the difference between what is an RV park, a mobile home park, a tiny house community, or a DIY tiny house community where we help people build their own tiny homes and work through that certification process. And there are cities making progress on tiny houses on permanent foundations. Portland, the city of Durham worked with NOAA to actually do a certification process. And Henderson County, if you're familiar with Aconey Bell or Simple Life, they have gone through a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. What I want to do is add to the toolbox for affordable housing. How can we work with zoning to enable spaces where this makes sense, as opposed to last year where actually zoning was taken away from areas where this could make sense? And I hope we can talk more about that. We can explore floodplain usage or other areas where sometimes the water rises to. You can have plans where they can be moved and housed temporarily during those transitional times. Village infill, the construct of ADU, so much to talk about where this can fit in the construct of the ADU. My benchmark is we can set higher standards and still allow for people to have flexibility in how they want to live. Here's my ask. Explore tiny houses on wheels and other tiny house options as a tool to help alleviate the housing crisis here in Asheville. Here's my offer. Next meeting, let us bring a tiny house to you so you can actually come out and take a look. Or if you want to come out separately, we invite you out to come and see how this works, the things that we need help with, the things that already exist and we can already run with. Never make a presentation without quoting yourself. Building a tiny house is hard, but finding a place to put it is even harder. And finally, if you can read the note written on the back of the bus, will return with baby. There are families who make the very active decision to live tiny. And so thank you. If we have a little bit of time, there are some other people who might want to make a short statement about their experience and decision to live tiny, or I would really appreciate questions on this topic.
Sure, there are about 3 more minutes left, so if anybody else wants to, who's with you, wants to make a comment about that, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Brett Coburn. I live in a tiny house with my wife. We moved here about 3 years ago, and our primary driver for choosing a tiny house, because we moved from a large Victorian house in Birmingham, Alabama, was financial, because we both wanted to make changes in our lifestyle. I was working way too many hours and had no time for what my passion was, which was really getting into startups and technology and working on that. I was in academia before. And my wife wanted to go back to graduate school, which she's doing now to become a therapist. So the two of those, us wanting to do that, we couldn't find any other way to juggle that with the way we were living before and moving into a tiny house. Excuse me, we've been able to do that, and things are going great now. So, for us, it's been a great lifestyle change, and we've really appreciated the opportunity to do that.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thanks. My name's Christopher Moorhead. I am the administrator for Tiny House Asheville and also work with the Asheville Small Home Advocacy Committee. And I did build a tiny house on foundation. I worked hand in hand with Buncombe County. It was a very difficult procedure. It took about 4 years. I did it solo. However, I'm also, I come to the table at a more of an advantage because I'm a middle-aged professional, and I do realize that level of privilege requires some sense of obligation to the community. So rather than talk about my build and what it's done for me, I think, it's pretty advantageous for anyone who decides to downsize and go smaller. I'd rather yield my time to give a little more support to what Drew is doing. I think that his campground is actually very prescient, not only for this city and this community, but for all cities and communities that are facing problems with distributing, funding for small, for houses that are disadvantaged, and for community needs, especially a city like ours where we're facing an infill crisis with these types of communities. It comes at no cost to the city. It's actually to the person who owns the campground, and so it's a very affordable solution as well. I think, as Drew has pointed out, the quality of builds, we're actually getting more of a stronger reputation for better builds, better quality, and then most of the opposition I talk with, they mentioned that they're afraid that down the road this will become something of a shantytown scenario that would happen with mobile homes. However, I don't really foresee that happening because a lot of the ethos is with pride and DIY and creating those things for yourself. And I think that as a homeowner and as someone who's building themselves, that might actually install more of a sense of citizenship locally.
Great.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was going to share with Paul is a very similar conversation. Went to a whole workshop on mobile homes, small homes, park mobiles, tiny homes, all of that. And I totally agree that we do need to start experimenting with these. These are units that can get put out for, again, $40,000, $50,000. I have no idea what our current regulatory framework is for that in terms of zoning and things like that. So I would like to add that we add that to, I'd like to ask that we add that to the workshop in August, that we have a conversation about, what's the lay of the land for tiny homes right now, and both on wheels, on foundations, how can we make, what's the path for making better use of those? Because again, these are things that are getting built at, square footage costs that are just miles below what we're subsidizing right now. So.
Just from a staff perspective, I can let you know that community development's working pretty closely with planning, and we've been sharing information about zoning and ordinance struggles, perhaps around ADUs and tiny homes. And Todd, the director of planning, has set up a meeting. So with some of those, not only look at other zoning issues, but particularly some things around ADUs and tiny homes as well. For what it's worth, on a personal note, I actually went to Simple Life, the tiny home community in Henderson County in Flat Rock. And I didn't get in a unit, but we drove through the community, and there were tiny home units for sale for $99,000 to I think $118,000. But it was it was on foundation, very nice community, and I think we're going to try to go back to get inside. But it was it seems to be very popular down in Henderson County. in Flat Rock.
So if you all would make a recommendation or make a motion, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll turn my sentence into a motion that we add consideration of tiny homes, sort of broadly speaking, on foundation, off on wheels, and include mobile homes in that too, for our workshop. So that's my motion.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? We are. Great. All right, thank you very much. As you said, timely conversation. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Any other public comment? And I think on your offer to bring a tiny home, I would just, it'd be awesome for us all to get up and troop out to a tiny home, but let me just suggest that maybe you could reach out to us individually to come take a look at where what you're doing. Yeah, great. All right, anybody else?